Jenna Collins laced up her running shoes for what should have been an ordinary morning jog, just like Katie Bell did 2 years earlier, and Lila Sanders a year after that. None of them would return home. All three vanished without a trace from different corners of Columbus, Ohio. Their only connection, a quiet predator watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What seemed like isolated tragedies would unravel into one of the city's darkest and most chilling mysteries. The work of a killer hiding in plain sight. On the morning of October 11th, 2017, Jenna Collins left her apartment in the quiet Columbus suburb of Worthington for what should have been a routine jog. The sun was just rising, casting a pale gold glow over the empty streets. Jenna, a 27-year-old graphic designer, had always been disciplined, structured to a fault. She ran the same 3-mile route every morning before work, always returned by 7:30 a.m. and never strayed from her schedule. That made what happened next all the more alarming. When Jenna didn't arrive at work that morning, her manager assumed she was sick, but calls and texts went unanswered. Her roommate, who worked night shifts and had been asleep when Jenna left, woke up to find her bed still empty by noon. That was the first real sign that something was wrong. Her running shoes were gone. Her phone wasn't in the apartment, and her wallet was untouched. But there were no signs of a struggle, no misplaced items, and no blood. The front door was locked. Jenna had simply vanished. Her friends and family immediately reported her missing. Police responded quickly, given her responsible reputation and the unexplained circumstances. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and pulling security, footage from nearby houses. There was no sign of her on any camera, not even at the entrance to the complex. As more time passed, the tension escalated. Flyers went up across the city. Search teams combed the nearby woods and parks. Volunteers traced her jogging path over and over again. Nothing turned up. Then, 2 days later, Jenna's phone was found in an unexpected place. A storm drain near a busy intersection about 5 miles from her usual route. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. When detectives examined it, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No threatening messages, no strange calls. But the location itself was bizarre. Jenna had no reason to be there. That spot wasn't near any of her known routines, friends, or appointments. It was as if she'd been taken far from her normal path. The area where the phone was found was checked thoroughly, but there were no more clues, no dropped items, no tire tracks, nothing helpful. Investigators were left with one question. How had she gotten there? Did someone force her? Was she in a vehicle? And if so, why hadn't anyone seen it? Jenna was not the type to hitchhike or accept rides from strangers. The randomness of the location only deepened the mystery. As hours turned into days, the hope of finding Jenna alive began to fade. Her bank accounts were untouched, her social media silent, and no one had come forward with information. The media picked up the story, and soon all of Columbus knew her name. Still, no leads emerged. To those who knew her, Jenna wasn't the kind of person to run away. She had no reason to, but without answers, everyone was left waiting and wondering if the worst had already happened. As the search for Jenna Collins dragged into its second week, frustration and fear spread throughout Columbus. Detectives had little to go on. No credible sightings, no ransom demands, no major breakthroughs. The only physical evidence was the cracked phone found miles away from her usual route. Investigators began combing through older missing persons reports, hoping to find any similarities, any patterns that could help them understand what happened. That's when they came across the case of Katie Bell. Katie had vanished in June, 2015 under eerily similar circumstances. She was 24 years old, lived on the opposite side of the city, and disappeared during her early morning run. Just like Jenna, there were no signs of a struggle, no suspicious activity on her phone or bank accounts, and her body was never recovered. Her case had gone cold after a month of fruitless searching. At the time, it was chalked up to a potential runaway or abduction by someone unknown. But now, it looked a lot like Jenna's case. Then came another connection. Lila Sanders, 25, went missing in September 2016. Again, a young woman, an early riser, vanished without warning in Columbus. Lila had been walking to her yoga class when she disappeared. She was last seen by a neighbor leaving her apartment building with her gym bag slung over her shoulder. Just like the others, no trace of her was ever found. And just like the others, her phone was discovered later in a completely unrelated part of town. The similarities were undeniable. All three women were in their 20s, active, lived alone, or with roommates, and were last seen during the early morning hours. Each had gone missing in a different part of the city, but their routines and the lack of evidence were disturbingly alike. The final thread that tied them together was the witness statements. Scattered reports of a white pickup truck near each of the disappearance sites. At the time, the sightings were dismissed as coincidence. Now, they were being reconsidered with fresh eyes. The Columbus Police Department created a dedicated task force, pulling in officers who had worked on the earlier cases. Case files were reopened, timelines rebuilt, and witness statements re-examined. With 3 cases spanning 3 years, the investigators began to fear what they were really looking at was a serial offender. Someone careful, calculated, and likely watching his victims long before striking. The white pickup truck, once a detail buried in notes, became their most valuable clue. But tracking down one white pickup in a city full of them was a monumental task. They started with traffic cameras, business surveillance, and neighborhood footage. Anything that might have captured a vehicle at the time of the disappearances. A spreadsheet of trucks was created, cross-referenced with timestamps and locations. Progress was slow, but the realization that Jenna's case wasn't an isolated incident gave the investigation new momentum. What had seemed like 3 separate tragedies were now being seen as pieces of a much larger and far darker puzzle. The turning point came from a grainy traffic camera mounted near a strip mall in northeast Columbus. It had recorded footage just minutes after Jenna Collins was last seen. Among the passing vehicles was a white pickup truck matching the description from earlier witness accounts. What caught investigators' attention wasn't just the color or shape, it was the time and location. The truck was captured driving away from the area where Jenna's phone had been found, mere minutes after her estimated disappearance. It wasn't proof, but it was the strongest lead they had. Detectives pulled plates from every white pickup seen in that window of time. One of them was registered to a man named Andrew Kepler. He was a 39-year-old construction contractor who lived less than 4 miles from where Jenna had been jogging. Kepler had no criminal history, no complaints, not even a speeding ticket. His profile didn't scream suspect, but the overlap was impossible to ignore. He owned a white Ford F-150. He lived near Jenna. He worked flexible hours. And most importantly, his truck had been in the right place at the wrong time. Investigators visited Kepler's home for an informal interview. He appeared calm, cooperative, and unbothered by their questions. He said he had been on his way to a hardware store that morning, preparing for a job site across town. He provided a receipt from a purchase made that day, just 30 minutes after Jenna's phone was found. It gave him a partial alibi, one that placed him away from the scene by the time the phone was discovered. But something about the interaction didn't sit right with the lead detective. The story felt too neat. The team dug deeper into Kepler's routines. They pulled up more traffic footage, looking for his truck in the days before Jenna vanished. A detective noticed something odd. In one clip, the rear panel of the truck had a deep dent. 3 days later, in another video, the dent was gone. That kind of bodywork didn't happen overnight unless someone had something urgent to hide. This was enough to get a judge to sign a search warrant for Kepler's home and vehicle. The search revealed nothing unusual in the truck itself, but things changed dramatically when investigators stepped into Kepler's basement. Behind a freestanding shelf loaded with paint cans and old tools, they found a false wall. It opened into a hidden room. The space was small and windowless. Inside, they discovered a mattress stained with what appeared to be blood, a set of handcuffs, bolted to the wall, several burner phones, and most disturbingly, personal belongings linked to all 3 missing women: Jenna's shoes, Katie's scarf, Lila's gym bag. Everything was neatly placed, as if kept like trophies. DNA analysis would later confirm that blood found on the mattress belonged to Jenna and Lila. In one of the burner phones, police found saved photographs of the women, some clearly taken without their knowledge. The pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together. What they had feared was now confirmed. The disappearances weren't isolated incidents. They were all the work of one man, and he had been hiding in plain sight. News of the discovery in Andrew Kepler's basement spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the Columbus community. For years, the city had searched for answers, not knowing a predator had been living quietly among them. The hidden room was disturbing in its design. It was soundproofed, windowless, and reinforced from the inside. There were no signs of escape routes or ventilation, just a single low-watt bulb casting a dim, yellowish glow. On the floor lay a stained mattress, and nearby, restraints were bolted into the concrete walls. Everything was arranged methodically. It wasn't a space made in panic. It had been planned. Investigators began cataloguing the items they found inside. Jenna Collins's running shoes were tucked in the corner, still laced. Katie Bell's scarf was folded on a shelf. Lila Sanders's gym bag still had her ID inside. There was also a journal filled with cryptic entries. Some were just dates, others were single words like return, quiet, or failure. The most chilling pages included lists of names and addresses, some with check marks beside them. Police feared there might be more victims they hadn't yet identified. The evidence was overwhelming. Kepler was arrested on the spot. At first, he said nothing. For days, he remained silent during interrogation, refusing to speak even with his attorney present. Then, in a sudden and unexpected shift, he began talking. But what he said only deepened the mystery. Kepler admitted to abducting Jenna, Katie, and Lila, but he denied murdering them. He insisted they had agreed to come with him, that they were unhappy with their lives and looking for a way out. According to Kepler, he had created a place for them, a quiet escape, where they could live without pressure, without judgment. He described it as a safe space, one where he provided shelter and food. He claimed their deaths were accidents, though he never explained how or when they occurred. The details were vague, contradictory, and unsettling. He spoke with a calmness that made his words even more disturbing. Despite his claims, no bodies were found. The basement room showed signs that people had been held there, but beyond the bloodstains and belongings, there was no indication of what ultimately happened to the women. Kepler wouldn't say. He only repeated that they chose to stay until things went wrong. For investigators, it was clear he was lying, or at least not telling the full truth. Psychological evaluations painted him as intelligent, detached, and methodical. Neighbors were stunned. They described Kepler as quiet, helpful, and polite. He had fixed fences, offered lawn equipment, and hosted barbecues. No one ever suspected he was capable of something so horrific. That was perhaps the most terrifying part, how completely normal he had appeared. The basement became the center of the investigation, but without the victims' bodies, the case remained incomplete. Prosecutors built their argument around the DNA, the surveillance footage, and Kepler's partial confession. Still, the lack of physical remains haunted the case. Families of the victims begged for closure, but Kepler offered none. The truth, whatever it was, remained sealed behind the concrete walls of that hidden room. Andrew Kepler's trial began in the summer of 2019, drawing national media attention. The courtroom was packed every day. Family members of the victims, reporters, curious citizens, and law enforcement officials who had worked the case for years. Kepler sat stone-faced throughout, showing little emotion as the prosecution presented graphic evidence from his basement and played surveillance footage tracing his movements before and after each disappearance. The journal he had kept was read aloud in court, its cryptic language hinting at obsession and control. One page listed the words capture, silence, keep, written over and over again. The prosecution didn't have the victims' bodies, but what they did have painted a chilling and convincing picture. Forensic experts testified that the blood on the mattress and restraints was a match to Jenna Collins and Lila Sanders. Trace evidence found on items in the hidden room matched Katie Bell. Investigators described in detail how the basement had been specifically modified to conceal noise and escape attempts, further proving premeditation. The absence of bodies didn't weaken their case, it made it more disturbing. These women had vanished so completely that only Kepler knew what truly happened. The defense tried to argue that Kepler was mentally ill and delusional, a man who believed he was helping women rather than harming them. They leaned on his lack of a criminal record and his cooperative behavior when first approached. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence of control, isolation, and deception was too strong. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, Kepler was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though justice had been served in the courtroom, it brought little comfort to the victims' families. Without knowing where their daughters' remains were, there could be no funerals, no final goodbyes. Jenna's mother said in her victim impact statement that justice means nothing without peace, and that peace was something Kepler had stolen and refused to return. Despite repeated efforts, he never revealed the locations of the bodies. He never explained what happened during the final moments of each woman's life. His silence was his last act of control. In the months following the trial, authorities searched multiple properties linked to Kepler, abandoned lots, storage units, and even nearby wooded areas were combed thoroughly, but nothing was found. It was as if the women had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only heartbreak and questions. The city of Columbus tried to heal, but the shadow of the case lingered. News outlets dubbed Kepler the basement ghost, a man who lived among neighbors without suspicion, hiding a horrific secret just beneath the surface. Years later, the community still remembers the fear and disbelief. Parents kept their daughters closer. Runners avoided early morning routes. And the image of an ordinary man with a white pickup truck became a permanent symbol of how evil can hide behind the most unremarkable masks. The Columbus, Ohio murders remain one of the most haunting cases in the city's history, not just for what was done, but for how close it had all been.